Well, it is Friday, right? It's like the week that never ends. But it's going to end after the live stream. Welcome, it's Friday. Welcome to Live at the Nutmeg Tavern. And I am here on the other side of the time vortex, alone in the Nutmeg Tavern. But there's plenty of room. Obviously, I'm alone. You can find a seat. Come in, have a seat, and you're going to have to get your own drink. The bartender back there is, he's not very communicative. I can't really get him to respond, so we're just going to ignore him today. Oh, it's dark back there now.
Sorry.
Anyway, on the other side of the time vortex where they're playing around with the lighting, and I think that's the lighting you wanted.
Yeah, it was.
You want that on,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're in the dark. Here we are.
Say there was only.
But
Okay.
You can't see Ryan, which is probably a good thing.
Right.
On the other side, on the console, you can tell why we're late today and like everything. I'm not blaming Ryan. It's a matter of training, and because that darn thing is complicated in any way. So
We're blaming Aaron.
yeah, we're blaming Aaron. He's not here. Sick, or so he says. So anyway. Ryan is on the console, and Kyle is in his normal spot back there, kind of gathering up questions, watching the chat, and connecting with you folks out there. And it has been somebody asked on Patreon today. It's like, well, what's going to be the topic today? I think it was Sue. Thank you, Sue, for chiming in, asking about that. The topic is John had to do boring stuff all week long, except for, was it Thursday? No, it was Wednesday when Ellen was here. Did some video work on Wednesday, but most of the week has been spent doing boring business things that don't have anything to do with history, and I'd rather not be doing them, but I have to do them anyway. So, and that keeps me away from the fun stuff. A little bit, we did have a little bit of fun talking about, developing new items, which is always fun because there's this, this mix of historical research that you have to do along with, finding historical examples, and then can we reproduce that, and who are we going to get to do it? Do we have to do it ourselves? Those things are fun, but they take a long time to bring to fruition. I like stuff that I can do, and it's like, look, I made it. Even a cabin is faster than a lot of that new products. But it's fun nonetheless. Ryan was in on some of that. Did you have fun with that, Ryan?
I did. It was a good time.
Good. And so how is the lip sync this week? That's my question to the folks out there watching. Last week we had people having issues with, like I was an old time talkie movie and the lips would move and then sound would come later. How is the sound this week? Because I fussed around with it for a good hour this afternoon trying to find just the right number to put in. So we'll see how the time vortex is going along with that. Get well, Aaron. We need you back here because obviously you're the only guy who knows how to run this equipment properly. So hurry up. What else happened this week, Ryan? Anything super exciting? Oh, these things are over there. They're out of my reach. I'll tell that story later. Remind me of that story, Ryan.
Yeah. That's a great story.
It's my favorite story of the week.
Exciting. It's just been busy. I don't know. I mean, It's just been like work.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been doing some planning for this year's kind of YouTube content. Now, probably about half or more of our content is spur of the moment. Hey, this week let's do a video on, and we create the video basically out of nothing because it's generally what crazy wild hair John is researching at the moment. But then there's all that other content, the kind of content that takes a week, a month, 6 months to create, to plan. And we've been working on some of that, and we have a lot more of that to do. Now's your chance to chime in if you're interested in a particular kind of content, a particular historic site, or a particular, whatever. Now's a great time in the chat if you want to jump in there and and folks will, kind of write some of that down. Those are always kind of helpful. I mean, we can't always do them, okay?
Right.
About 99% of the time we can't do them, but it's always helpful for us to get an idea about where people are kind of interested. Let's go with a couple of questions if you got them, Kyle.
Okay. How were birthdays celebrated? Did they get gifts / cake?
Birthdays. I think I know why that topic came up. Birthdays, I think with so many celebrations that we kind of have brought to the forefront today, it wasn't a big deal in the 18th century. Maybe they were a little bit closer to I'm trying to survive, and they didn't really concern themselves that much with the little celebrations like that. So I don't think there's as much of that. And sometimes you see references to those in, say, like journals, but a lot of times those are reflective. Maybe they were a little more self-reflective in the 18th century, I'm not sure. At least people that are writing journals and diaries, right? They're automatically self-reflective, and when they write entries about that, they generally are connecting it with their life, what they've achieved, what they haven't achieved. And we just think, where's my cake? So I'm not sure that I've got so much to say about what happens in an 18th century birthday party.
What was candy or confection sweets like?
Definitely a little different than, what we certainly have sweets today. If you ask, a lot of my family, especially my wife, candy is chocolate, and chocolate wasn't a thing in candy form in the 18th century. They certainly used it for like a chocolate drink and as a breakfast drink, but not making things like chocolate bars to any extent. So most of the time candy is more like hard candies or even sort of soft candies. And of course we did the Candy in the 18th Century episode that had to do with the lime peel, which is the funniest episode in the world. We did that. We only did that episode because it's like, oh, we're going to be doing these pink pancakes. That's, everybody's going to be interested in that. But we're going to put these on top of the pink pancakes. Let's go ahead and do this candied lime peel episode just for kicks. And of course, that was the exciting episode. That's what everybody wanted to see. It's like when you give your kid a birthday present or a Christmas present and they throw the thing over their shoulder and they play with the cardboard box. That's kind of like what that episode was like. But candied lime peel, that's one of those kinds of things. They might call something like that a sweetmeat in the 18th century. Little items that have been turned sugary, and they did that with certain kinds of fruit too. They would sort of infuse sugar into these fruits, and it was partially to preserve them and preserve their flavors so they can have them later on so they wouldn't rot, and then also to make a sort of a candy with them. Another item that is candy-like, and we haven't done an episode, but we plan on doing it whenever I get the time to, try it out 10 or 15 times. And that is an item that has a very, let's call it a deceptive name called clear cakes in the 18th century. And those are actually boiled down sugars that turn into, I think, an interesting kind of rubbery, sugary, maybe sort of a hard version of Turkish Delight. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but a certain kind of pseudo-soft sugar candy. I don't think they're meant to get super hard. Probably gummy, probably pull the fillings right out of your teeth. But luckily in the 18th century, we don't have fillings. Whole teeth fall out instead.
So we've got some people in the chat saying the live stream's not working for them. Can you guys see us? Can you see it? Is it going okay?
Super good question.
Yeah.
Because we could see it in the One Studio thing.
Right.
What do you think? We don't have any answers.
I'm waiting for answers.
YouTube changed the interface recently, and of course we're not as experienced with this silly interface, and so maybe it's not working like it should.
It says that it's working on my end. So if it's not working for you guys, please let us know.
What do you think? Well, I'm just going to keep jabbering away because that's what I do.
Okay. When writing recipes, why does the letter S look like an F? I love this question because I asked the same one.
Well, it's not just in recipes. It's everything in the 18th century. Was generally printed with this long S that sometimes it's called. There's another word that is not coming to mind here. Has to do with connecting of letters. Is it ligature? No, it isn't that. Anyway, it had to do with the I don't know. I wish I knew the exact answer to that. It's a good question. We did a video that was a Q&A, and it's still available online, and it has to do with the long S. So if you search our channel and search for long S, it will probably you'll be able to come up with that. And sometimes there is a set of rules about when that printed long S shows up in words versus when a regular S shows up. But it's strange because I don't even notice it anymore. I'll be reading along and my eye sees an S and the brain just keeps on moving along. So sometimes people ask me that question and I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Oh, I guess, yeah, there's all these really weird S's in there. I don't know why. They were crazy. It was like lightning round. That's my answer.
Were brick homes only for the very wealthy in the 18th century, or did the middle class also build them?
Oh, I think definitely you're going to end up with a lot of middle class homes like that. And in certain areas, those kinds of homes are, especially like London, right? It's like the whole place burns down, so we're not going to let people build with wood anymore. So we're going to force them to build with brick. I don't think that much of that is happening in North America in the 18th century. And there's a lot of comments about how you don't see that many brick homes, at least in that early section. We had so much wood available that most of the time wood is what people are building out of in North America versus someplace like Georgia in England, where the wood is gone and brick is a more standard building material.
Where would you look to find some of the tins they baked their puddings in? What would you suggest?
You'll certainly see a certain quantity of shaped puddings that have certain shapes that are we might consider them today or 20 or 30 years ago as Jello molds, but their molds weren't made like that. They weren't deep drawn, stamped out metal, and they were generally made in pieces. But they would have some special forms, star shapes, Turk's hat shapes, some other kinds of shapes like that. There are some of those molds that are still sort of common and available. But antique stores, you're going to find some of those sorts of things around, and you will find the steamed pudding molds that close up completely. They're tin with a hinge and a little latch, so the water doesn't get in there as much. And some other kind of little baking molds, little tin pans for that. There are some tinsmiths here in this time period, meaning the 21st century, that make 18th century style molds. You'll have to just do some searching online for that.
Did they have vegetarian dishes in the 18th century?
They did have vegetarian dishes, and I've spoken a bit about vegetarianism in the 18th century before. There are several different reasons for that. People do that for economic reasons, because meat is expensive, or they do it for health reasons because they think meat is going to be bad for them, or they might do it for ethical reasons, thinking it's bad to eat animals. So you see some of that, each one of those three sort of reasons in different segments of the population. It's very, very small compared to the idea today. Ben Franklin, for a while, didn't want to eat meat for ethical reasons, but he, different things about nature. He said, well, if that's true, maybe, it's okay. So he changed his mind later on in life about that. Benjamin Lay, there's an excellent, interesting book about the secret life of Benjamin. I think it's Secret Life of Benjamin Lay. And he was a Quaker in the early 18th century. And there were certainly some Quakers that had the ethical concept of, no, we don't want to eat animals. He was very, very outspoken on that, and probably one of the most interesting characters that connects up with the thought process of today. So if you're interested in the kernel of that idea happening in the 18th century, look for this character, this man called Benjamin Lay, L-A-Y, and there's been a recent book on that historical person. Very, very interesting. So there are recipes for any one of those reasons. The little cookbook that we carry called Primitive Cookery, which has mostly vegetarian-ish types of dishes, that's meant specifically for the idea of economic reasons. Poor people can't afford meat, so let's make a cookbook for them.
Are there any recipes that have nutmeg and garlic in the 18th century savory dishes?
Not together. At least garlic shows up almost never in, I like that term, almost never, in the 18th century English cookery cookbooks. If you look in the American Cookery Cookbook, the first American cookbook that's printed by somebody writing in North America in the 18th century, that's 1796, really at the very, very end. She even talks about garlic in the beginning part. The whole first third of the book is about the items of cookery, not necessarily recipes or receipts. And she mentions garlic, and she says, it's only good for medicine. It's not really good for eating. It's used mainly for cookery in French cookery or Spanish cookery, and doesn't really show up in English cookery to any great extent. In cookbooks, doesn't mean it's not necessarily being used for cooking, and Cresswell even talks about, I think it was Cresswell, or it was one of those journals, could have been William Byrd, not William Byrd, Alexander Hamilton, the early Alexander Hamilton. One of those characters mentions eating at some place where the garlic flavor was just so intense they couldn't even eat it. It would probably mean it had a tiny little bit in it. So garlic might have been used in everyday vernacular cooking, but it doesn't show up in the cookbooks. And so the idea of garlic and nutmeg, they don't go together. They don't go together. I wouldn't put garlic and nutmeg together in anything. Well, unless I was trying to poison somebody.
Was fall a big season for deer hunting back then?
It is a big season for deer hunting, not for the hides, because actually you want a thicker skinned hide, and apparently you want, is it blue? Is that the term, Ryan?
What's that?
Blue hides, deer hides, remember that we were talking about?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's sort of like a summer hide where the skin is thicker, but if you're hunting deer and you want them for meat, fall is and early winter is a great time for any kind of butchery, because of course they don't have freezers, they didn't have refrigerators, and so you want the natural, like we call it, the Canadian refrigerator. You just stick stuff outside, it's so cold, right? It's the natural time of year to do those things because the meat doesn't go bad quickly. And so, deer hunting this, in say early winter, perfect time to do that because it's going to last a long time because it's cold outside.
Okay, I need to interrupt real quick.
Yes.
So apparently, I'm guessing because of the transition on the interface here, there are actually two different streams going. One of them is dead, one of them is not. I don't know how to tell you to get to the right one. And also, if you're doing super chat stuff, it's not showing up on my feed here, but it is on my phone. So I'll probably just do them one at a time. I'll try to get to everybody's, and if I miss it, I'm really sorry about that. But I'll give it my best shot.
Say it's probably why there's not many questions right now.
Yeah, you're probably on the wrong pop-out.
Probably.
Try going to the other.
I will.
The other one.
Are you on the one that's?
He's probably yeah.
Right.
How annoying.
So here's somebody from in super chat, Enzo says, could you do a video about clothing of a civilian during the revolution? Thank you. Happy 2020.
Okay.
Hey, there's that pop out.
There we go.
Another one is, did colonial U.S. have tasty apples? Apples grown from seed taste nasty and are good for hard cider. Jenny apple seed planted apple trees from seed. And that is from Alicia.
Yes.
And another one from Mike. Thank you for helping me learn and live a little history every day. Happy New Year.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I don't have a great bunch of information on apple and apple varieties. It's probably a fairly deep and interesting topic. Kind of figuring out, that whole. We take the apples that we have for granted. I know I do, and those kind of varieties, and some are. Well, I think a lot of our apple varieties are very, very new, because we do a lot of manipulating of our plant species right now, because we have a lot more expertise than we did. Certainly there was that work going on in the 18th century, but you can imagine that it's a lot more primitive, and the apple types. You definitely hear about the apples not being all that tasty for eating, and so there'll be different varieties that are talked about in different books, and I think a lot of them were used for sweetening, but they weren't sweet, not like especially to our modern day palates. I'm going to say that apples were a lot different in the 18th century, at least most of the varieties that they would run into. And we will all definitely put that idea of clothing and what it looks like during the Revolutionary War and civilian together, and think about how that's. Some of that we can just cover in a picture study, and we can even do that in a live stream or whatever.
Somebody just asked what farmers would dress like in the 18th century.
Farmers are going to be wearing. It's interesting that each one of those kind of. It's like. It's certainly true today to a certain extent that each sort of occupation has its clothing that goes with it. And if you see somebody dressed up like that, that's a farmer, right? And or it's a fireman, or it's whatever. And they had exactly the same thing, if not more so, happening in the 18th century. And one of the things that shows up on farmers, you look in paintings or whatnot, smocks, which is kind of a garment that goes over the top of everything. Shirt that's generally long and plain, sometimes had smocking on the front, but a lot of times they just had plain fronts to them, and they have a plain hat that's going to keep the sun off their head, and a lot of times they're going to be wearing trousers. And we think of trousers like, why wouldn't everybody be wearing trousers? Trousers were popular in the 18th century, but they were they're like overalls. They would go over the top of, sometimes you're wearing knee breeches on underneath it. So it's like something you'd put on to keep your clothes clean, just like the smock is on over the top of other clothing. It's there to keep your other clothing clean. And many times there'll be a gentleman or a farmer person, and he might have in his estate, he might list 3 or 4 or 5 pair of breeches, 1 pair of trousers. That's just to go over the top of all those things and keep them clean. But he's not wearing them out, or wearing them outside to see other people. So he's just putting them on. So farmer's going to have on a flat hat, a big hat to keep the sun off his head. He's going to have on, what you're going to see is a smock on the outside. He's probably going to have a shirt on the inside, maybe even a waistcoat underneath that. He might have breeches on. He's going to have trousers on. He might be wearing something like clogs on his feet instead of regular leather shoes, but he's probably wearing something, unless he's in the muck or whatever, and he might be barefoot.
We got a question, Kyle?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know if John was done.
I'm done.
Right. Did they have bookshops?
Yes. Yeah, booksellers, generally called a bookseller, and he's going to do more than just carry books. He'll bind books for you. He'll fix your book binding for you, or he'll have a book binder that he works with. So they're doing multiple kinds of things at once, and his selection's going to be it's going to sway heavily to certain things. He will have blank books, commonplace books. He'll have religious books to a great extent, because that's a lot of what the published materials were going on in the 18th century. He might have something like an almanac, and I don't have any examples here, but they have the regular hardback books that, of course, we're used to, and they're a lot like the hardback books are today. And then there's the paperback books that are sort of sewn together, and they are little pamphlet books, and those are very inexpensive and popular, and people would purchase those because they just want a little bit of something to read, and they can't afford a nice hardbound book. So there's different options there for booksellers in the 18th century.
How many people managed to work between currencies in the 18th century? Seems like a lot of different countries, coinage/money was in use.
True, very true. And I think there's always, when it has to do with money, people have this, since it's, like, you don't want to get ripped off, right? Nobody wants that in the 18th century. And so people are very cognizant of all those different currencies and the sort of discount rate on them. And they keep those in their head. And it gets very complicated in North America because there is different kinds of currencies that are being traded in North America, much more so than, say, you're in Great Britain. In Great Britain, you're dealing with, sometimes some paper money, banknotes, whatnot, and then all the hard currency that's going through. And occasionally you're going to see foreign hard currency coming through, probably not all that much, mostly just standard, because it gets rejected, basically. But, they're going to be dealing with all this coinage and certain banknotes. In North America, there's not very much hard currency floating around. We're using multiple different foreign country hard currencies. Spanish mill dollars and British coins and French coins are coming in, and then we have all these strange paper currencies that are being traded from different states or colonies, and they have different rates. And then they would do that classic sort of third world, hey, we're gonna say all our 13 shilling notes actually are 130 shillings now. Let's add a zero to that. So there's old money, there's new money, and it's like, oh, I don't want any New York shillings, I only want Connecticut shillings. So it was very complicated, but I think most people, since they had to buy things all the time, they knew what they were transacting in, and they would know, well, I discount that one by 50% or whatever it is. And it's very, very hard to interpret when you're looking at all that stuff when you're doing the research. Okay, when he says shilling, does he mean New York shilling? Does he mean a British shilling? What is it? What are we talking about here? And you almost have to use the context to kind of work it out and say, no, it doesn't make sense if it's that price. He must mean this other piece of money.
How is the cabin holding up with the first few snowfalls?
We haven't been getting a lot of snow. It's weird. We were building the cabin and then it snowed right there. It was like the last day, it's snowing like crazy. And then since then, what have we had? We've had maybe an inch of snow.
Dusting.
Yeah, we've had hardly any snow since then. Rain, it's supposed to rain like in 2-3 inches in the next 2 days.
The cabin may float away this weekend.
Right. No, it's on top of a hill. Well, it's on the side of it. It might float down the hill. So we've had a lot of rain, and the roof leaks here and there, but we expected that, okay? It leaks just like the roofs would leak in the 18th century. But it's holding up tremendous, and I've got to go and, with all this rain, the big experiment is, okay, how much is it gonna, wash away some of the daubing material that is sort of toward the weather, especially what's happening with the chimney. That's what I'm, really interested to see how much weathering is going on with that. So it's so far amazing, but I'll tell you, it doesn't get warm in that thing very quickly. Not until we figure out what's going to go on with the insulation, and we'll see. I've got several different ideas. I just don't know if I'll have enough time to make them happen before it gets warm, then I won't want it anymore. I'll break here, and I want to talk about the new Patreon people that we've had since the last time we've had a live stream, so 1 week ago. New Patreon people, Mary Guizo, I hope so. Kurt and Mary Noonhouse, Jennifer Lewis, Mark Lucas, someone under the name of Toxicity, and
Nice.
Tom. Thank you, all you new folks on Patreon. And Patreon is one of those ways that people can support us with this little amount of money per month. It's like $2 or $5 or whatever. Actually, you can put in anything you want. So there's like 500, 600 people that support us on Patreon. So if you're one of those Patreon supporters, thank you. There are some people who support us directly. It's like, oh, I just want to give them this little bit of money. Boop. And the best way to do that is PayPal. There's a link in the description section. The new PayPal people, Deborah Smith, Geiselher Worm, and Martina Tedders. I think that's as good as I'm going to do on those. Again, those are especially wonderful when people help us out with making content. It's a weird and strange, wonderful world we live in where we get to make really interesting content that people, want to check out, see, and it's not necessarily easy for us to understand what is going to work, what doesn't work. When people support us in these ways, it's like, we know you're going to do the right thing here. That helps us out with not have it helps us not have to make sure that every single video is going to be a blockbuster or a baked onion, because you can't do it. You can't.
Right.
I don't want to have to make videos that are always chasing the YouTube algorithm. And it's like, well, this is, it's got to be this way. You've got to have this clickbait title and this crazy picture, or else, you can't afford to make videos. So it's because people support us this way, is that we can make videos and know that, hey, this one's good information, but, it may not be the most exciting video for just regular people to watch.
Hey, real quick, thank you so much to everybody who is concerned about Super Chat not working. Thank you for trying to donate and ask really cool questions. I don't know what's wrong with it.
Is there a monetization box that's not checked on that page?
Not that I can see, but I will look for it.
YouTube. What can I say? It's a battle.
What are the basic period cooking implements you recommend?
Well, get a birch twig whisk. That's number one. Everyone needs a whisk. It's almost better. It's almost, well, let's see. I was going to say it's almost more interesting to go with the backwards, what things aren't proper, but maybe that's not the best way to go. I always need about 400 mixing bowls, but that's because I'm making a video and I have to have it in multiple different stages. Mixing bowls, ceramic, wood sometimes, but I like ceramic and metal to work with most of the time. Lots of wonderful spoons to work with. One of the items that shows up, we used to sell them, but they're hard to do, is a sieve to strain things out. Sometimes they had ceramic colanders or whatnot. And if it depends on when you're like trying to go big or small, right? So you always have to have a frying pan. Everybody has to have a frying pan. And for boiling or cooking things in that we think of, we would just grab a large saucepan off the shelf. They didn't have kind of quite like that sometimes, but more they used these sort of things that were like buckets. We would look at it and say, why are you cooking in a bucket? Well, they cooked in buckets in the 18th century, which is odd. But when you do a lot of boiling, we don't do as much boiling cooking as they did in the 18th century. But those are some of the main things. I'm sure I'm missing something. One of the it was like the food. What's the word I want? The food processor of the 18th century is a mortar and pestle, which it's like nobody's using a mortar and pestle these days. Maybe a little one to grind up herbs or something. They would have these giant mortar and pestles, and they would mush up things like they didn't have meat grinders, so they would chop up the meat and then they'd mush it in the mortar and pestle and turn it into a pate, and turn it and mix that with things and turn it into a force meat. That mortar and pestle shows up over and over again. People are grinding these things down into a powder using a mortar and pestle. Today we'd put it in a thing and then off it goes. It's in a powder, and boy, saves a lot of time.
What was an average day for children back then?
Children's lives in the 18th century are changing a lot from the beginning to the end. And in the beginning, children to a greater extent, if they're not somebody who's directly in the, I'm going to end up being the master of this estate someplace, right? So, some big landholder. They're going to be trained to work right away. You're always training your kids to, even the person who's going to be a large landholder, he's going, have lots of workers underneath him, and it's like people doing different kinds of things. They're even always in that mode of, from childhood, we're training these people up to be adults, and, children were kind of treated like miniature adults. You're going to have to be an adult. So, 7 or 8 years old, let's have you doing a job. And so schooling is a little bit different. It's definitely more geared toward that job situation. And of course, it's hard to generalize too, because children's lives vary a great deal from urban situations to, rural situations. And in different cultures too. So, some places are a little bit more heavy on schooling, and other places almost reject schooling. Like, why would you want to waste your time in school? You should be, heading toward, learning a trade.
When I watched the Flip episode, I was wondering why they didn't temper the egg so as to avoid having scrambled eggs in it.
Good question. And naturally, that's what we would do today. But if you're careful, you end up with that same thing. But I don't know. It's one of those, when you look at the recipe and you get the hint of it saying, oh, make sure to strain this through a cloth. They're talking about straining out those bits that if you got those eggs too hot and they turned into scrambled eggs, that you would be straining them out. Instead of instructing them to make sure to temper your eggs, bring them in a little bit, either they didn't want to take the time to explain it, or they figured you either already knew how to do it.
And there's a lot of that in period recipes.
Right, it's like they know how to do this. Or no matter how I describe it, they're not going to do it right anyway, so just tell them to strain it through a cloth, right? So
for what it's worth, we didn't have any scrambled eggs. It was really good.
Yeah, and it was super tasty.
Yeah.
I was blown away.
Yeah. So Super Chat is fixed, and we got some catching up to do. Ooh. So right now, S.J. Maguire, what entertainment was available for ordinary people?
Entertainment for
David Parker, thank you for all of the great content. Natalie and Tara. And it just says testy test.
Woohoo!
And it was a donation of $17.76,
Whoa.
which is very
good number.
Mike says, for more nutmeg and to test the super chats. Denise says, love the color of that coat.
I do too.
Yeah. Actually, people are asking if it's going to be available in the catalog. Or on the website.
Yeah.
Man. Rob Poole says, how is John celebrating his birthday? Happy birthday. Singing Steel Forge. The live stream with H. Northrup was really fun.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. We like him a lot. Michael, do you have any knowledge on the 18th century piracy in coastal areas or the types of food drink consumed on pirate ships?
Ooh, pirate food.
David Dinelli, how did people stay warm during the cold winter? Cresswell mentioned wine freezing in a room he was sleeping in. Are you able to ride as fast as I'm going?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Sue O'Connor. At last, baked beans, molasses, garlic, and nutmeg.
Ooh.
Helen B. First time seeing the live stream live. Love this channel and have tried several recipes with success. It's mulled or spiced wine popular during the 18th century.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got one more that I can't quite get to the second. Let me see why. Yeah, I'll figure that out. Go ahead, John.
Entertainment, folks. Everyday people in the 18th century, and I think this is going to be a topic that we hit on hopefully throughout the year, and we're working on different people to talk to about this, and sort of building up a picture. At least and this has been something that's kind of been running in my head for the last 9 months or so, probably 9 years, and I wasn't even paying attention. But that idea that today's entertainment, the entertainment world, and how people are entertained today is, I'm going to call it broken. It's broken because we think that entertainment is something that professionals do, and of course, that isn't happening in the 18th century nearly as much. Obviously, there are a few very famous, like actors, a few famous musicians, very, very small numbers of these people, and the vast majority of people, and of course, there's no recorded music. Now, recorded music is the thing I think that messes up our world, that we end up consuming this recorded music over and over and over again, when they would get exposed to the same tune over and over again, but every time it's live and it's different, and a different person is doing it, or they're doing it, and it changes what it is. And so people are used to being involved in music themselves, either being a first-hand participant in the music, or being a receiver of instant live music. And so that whole idea of being entertained by this thing that is just a recorded doohickey, and that's very passive, whereas live entertainment that they would be participating in is something that is not a passive but an active participant there. They're clapping, they're stomping, they're just there for that person who's performing, if it's somebody else, to see them and to react to them. And if you've ever been in a live performance situation versus a recorded performance, it's completely different. So, tell us about that, Ryan.
Oh man, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to speak on it. I'm not a fan of the studio process. Mm-hmm. Being in the studio, I mean, it's like a means to an end. It's a way for me to be able to go play, and I want to be with people and get sweaty with people and have fun with people and do something together.
And every time you do a song, even though it's the same song, it's different, isn't it?
Oh,
it's
gosh,
like they're participating and changing the performance by their mere being in the audience. So you can imagine that, subtract out the whole possibility of recorded music in the 18th century, and everything is different. And it forces people, they can't listen to something that's been pre-recorded. So they're forced to participate in music if they want to enjoy it at all. So we don't get that as much. They would sing in church. They would, do all these things. They're actively participating in music.
I can't wait to dive into that subject.
Okay, so that took like 15 minutes.
Okay, and I've got a couple more real quick to add to the list. Everybody, thank you so much for coming and doing Super Chat, even though it was broken. That's cool.
Well.
Alicia Starr says most apple varieties are 200 years old, or minus 200 years old. Most fruit varieties are old. One fig. Tree type is 2,000 years old. It takes 30 years to make a new variety.
There we go.
Speed and Style, Tony says, Happy New Year. What's Ryan's shirt say? It says Iron Chic, and it's just a really cool band. And then one other person did, David Beiser did, he just gave a donation, and thank you very much.
Okay, back to my list. Natalie and Tara, hi. I wrote down HB. I can't remember what that was about. Yes, Northrop. Yeah, we'll have to have him on again so he can yak it up about horses because he's got it up there.
Yeah.
And I only make fences for horses, and then they step on my foot. And we've thought about some some more horse content. Like actual live whinnying beasts. So we'll see about whether or not any of that comes to fruition. So last time I had a horse hit.
John, I think HB you were going to thank somebody for saying happy birthday.
Oh yeah, happy birthday. Yes. So thank you everyone out there for your happy birthday wishes.
Kyle's coming in clutch over here.
Yeah.
Clutch, gotcha.
I should have written more than HB if I wanted to remember what it was. Piracy and food, by the time we get to the 18th century, piracy is a little less common. Not the classic age of piracy, which is 17th century. And so I don't think that the people that are being pirates are just normal old folk that are being bad. And so their life isn't going to be that much different than normal old folk in the 18th century. So if you were a pirate sailor, you're going to live the life of basically every other sailor in the 18th century, except you probably talk funny.
You gotta get through that list because we got more pouring.
I'm working. Staying cold. How did they stay warm in the cold? And they didn't, and they complained, and their ink froze in their inkwells when they were trying to write, and their houses weren't made to stay warm, and people in North America were lazy about making warm houses because they had giant forests behind them, and they could chop down trees and throw them in the thing all day long. So they just froze and they were used to it. And in fact, in Monday's video, we're going to talk a little bit about that because it's not going to be a cooking video. But I think you'll enjoy it.
Oh, it's going to be fun. I'm really excited about this one.
I wrote down Helen B, and I don't know what that means. And mulled wine. You see some recipes for it. We've done an episode or two about mulled wine or burnt wine, sometimes it's called, which sometimes when you say burnt, you just mean heated up. They're just like, you don't have to burn it, right? But that was just their way of describing it.
Helen B is asking about mulled or spiced wine.
Oh, well, there you go. It's all the same thing right there. And they might even have used a mulling poker or mulling, like a toddy iron, right? Heated up. How do I heat? I want my wine heated up. You're going to use a mulling poker for that. Mulled wine, right? It all goes together. And you might spice it. You definitely see some references to spicing it. Nutmeg, of course. I would be the first one I would put in. I'm through my list.
You are? Okay. Richard Healy says, my middle school student loved the cup and ball game, but not too keen on the pick up sticks. I hope to get a hoop and stick game for our field day activities.
Yeah.
Max are cool. Love the blue of the jacket.
Thank you.
The jacket just gets, people love that jacket.
It's pretty.
Happy birthday. Keep up the great work. Love the content and general vibe on your channel. That's from Wayne and Jessica Thompson.
Thank you.
Keltoid 5. I found a reference to land pirate named Paul Murrell from 1840s Tennessee. Enzo Vinci. If you know anything about Rochester, New York during the 18th century, please tell me. I am dying to know. Thanks.
Yeah, Rochester, New York, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would, I'd talk to the folks at Genesee Country Village Museum. I think that area gets a little bit more populated there in the early 19th century, and that's where some of that history kind of pops. Still kind of, deep back country and off the beaten track in the 18th century. But I don't have anything specific on Rochester. But really, again, those folks at Genesee Country Village are great, knowledgeable folk. Land pirates, 1840, I think even more interesting maybe the connection here between the coastal and the land pirates are river pirates in the early 19th century, and you definitely have some Ohio River pirates being bad men.
Yeah, and they would hole up in the caves.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
There's some great history stuff there.
That's a lot of your history class when you're growing up in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Michael says, are you going to collab with How to Drink?
How to Drink. We have talked to Mr. How to Drink. Remember what his name is?
I'm going to say the wrong name, but I think it's Greg.
We talked.
Really sorry if it's not.
Mr. How to Drink. I'll just leave it. And we're thinking about it. Sometimes you don't know how the collab is going to work with different kinds of channels. We talked to a couple of different ones, and it's always like, okay, how does it work physically? How does it work content-wise? It would be fun, and we love his content.
Yeah,
so
it's a great channel.
It is a great channel.
All right, Kyle, we got a little bit of time for a couple questions. Maybe.
Ooh, better make them lightning.
Real quick though, this one comment says local beekeeper is going to release a nutmeg mead tomorrow. I'll let you know.
Yowzers.
So.
Sounds yummy.
All right, I'm going to ask this question because it was asked last week and I didn't have a chance to get to it.
Got it.
How did farmers de-ice water for animals and around the house?
I think usually with an axe. I mean, really, it's like bust holes in the ice. And,
That's what's worked for you.
Yeah, and then it freezes up again. And I mean, if you've ever, lived on a little family farm in the Midwest, it's like, okay, who's gonna undo that thing? I mean, it was difficult. It is so difficult. And today we've got rubber buckets and things that you can flip them over and knock the big ice out. And you didn't have anything like that in the 18th century. So you probably had to do a lot more of making sure to give them the water and then watch them drink it and then dump it out so that the whole thing doesn't just fill up and then you can't empty it out. And, so yeah, that's going to be difficult.
Do you prefer cooking or cabin videos?
Oh, I like doing them all. It does get a little, it's nice to have variety and to be able to say, okay, I can do a cooking episode. Now I can do a different episode because, it's like after 500 cooking episodes, you're thinking, okay, another cooking episode. But we get lots of variety here, and it's one of the things we enjoy.
All right. And my last question, what are the ingredients of small beer?
Same ingredients for big beer. Small beer. Small beer is made generally from the second time through mash. So the mash that has the grains and whatnot that you use, the malted grains and malt that is in your beer material. It gets strained out. You get rid of all those things when you're making beer after it kind of goes through the first percolation. And then you're left over with this gunk, right? It's like, okay, well, what am I doing? I got a 5-gallon bucket full of slime. And you can either throw it out to the pigs, or that would be wasting it. There's still goodness in here. There's still sugars that have not been unlocked. And so you put it back through another process, which they did a lot of times. It's like, we put our grain through the mill, and we ended up with a bunch of really good flour and all this other junk. Well, put it through the mill again, and we'll turn it into more flour. Same thing with beer. We're going to take this used mash, and we're going to put it back through the process. It's not going to make as good a material. In fact, it's only got maybe a third or a quarter of the sugars left in it. We will extract those again, though. We'll let it, percolate a little bit longer, and we will get a very weak beer. And that's exactly what small beer is, and it might even be the third time around. So it might be really kind of, not so much, but that's what small beer is. And you might chuck in some, it's like, I might toss in a little molasses to percolate that up, give it some more sugars or whatnot in your second or third batch small beer. But that's what's going on.
We have one more super chat from Denise.
Thank you, Denise.
She says, I've seen my horse break the ice on a pond with her hoof.
Yeah. Well, when you're thirsty, you're gonna make it happen. As long as it's breakable. When it's 5 inches thick, that might not be so easy. So, it's been, sorry about the difficulty in making this live stream work. Aaron, come back next week. We need you. You guys you're what makes the channel go around here. Whether it's watching videos, commenting videos, giving us suggestions about content, helping us out with Patreon and Super Chat, and blah blah blah. It's all the only way it can happen is with you guys helping us out. So thank you so much for all you do. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.